the further that leadership gets away from the customer, like the riskier every decision becomes too.
I build it up.
What happens when you're responsible for making the automotive industry better, but you're not a person turning a wrench, you're not in the service drive writing work orders, or you're not running a store? You have to earn influence. For season 2 of Earn Influence, I'm joined by 3 who have done exactly what needed to happen from 3 very different corners of our industry. Kathleen Long has spent more than a decade helping shape strategy, partnerships, operations, and trust with RepairPal, which is now owned by Yelp. Kaylee Felio has built a career among the most overlooked profit center of the dealership, parts. She's had a massive impact on dealerships nationwide, both through PartsEdge itself and the PartsEdge podcast. Kelli works at the intersection of marketing, customer service, customer experience, culture, and the trust the dealership earns before the customer ever steps into the dealership. 3 completely different perspectives from 3 completely different lives, getting to share a little piece of that experience with you guys today on Earned Influence. Thank you very much for joining us, all 3 of you. We appreciate you and your voice. Welcome to the Wrench Turners podcast.
Hi.
So I have 3 amazing, extraordinary human beings with a career in automotive that none are currently working in a dealership. That tidbit will potentially put off some of you that are listening and watching, because I don't want to listen to somebody who's never worked in a dealership. Nay, that is not the appropriate path to think about. Why? Because perspective is one of the most invaluable things that we as technicians, as service advisors, as service managers, as parts people can learn. Because these folks, the 3 joined around me right now, have decades of experience with hundreds of dealerships, thousands of people consuming data, consuming experiences so that they can share something insightful with us that we will have never experienced in our lives. That tiny little tidbit could take you from what you are today to your dream tomorrow. So I have asked these 3 wonderful human beings on the show today, and each one of them to ask a question that the rest of us are going to answer. And that little tidbit is your nugget to go out and go forth tomorrow and win. So I'm going to call on one of them. I think I'm going to call on Kelli Verdi from Team Access first. Please and thank you. What is your question for us today?
Well, so since we're talking about like businesses growing, like that was like the topic I think, that we started off with. And, I think, Kaylee obviously has gone through a lot of like growing things. I'm sure like Kathleen has and as well. And, I think, as you start to grow, you reach like that uncomfortable like middle ground where like some people are carrying more than they should, but like they're not quite large enough to hire like everyone that they need. Even if even if it's not like you in particular, like with your own business, but even businesses like that you work with, I think for me, it's understanding like how do you make sure that growth doesn't come at the expense of service, and listening to your customers, listening to your audience. And, that can even be related to growing like a single person podcast or even like a single person business all the way up to really large ones. But, I just see that so much, with businesses that are scaling at every level that they stop listening to the customer needs, or they start like overbuilding products, or, they go down a path where, they think that they're building something that people are going to want and need, but really they stopped listening. And then that also ties into, the scalability question, because you can go off like the wrong path. So yeah, how do you make sure that growth doesn't come at the expense of service and what you're trying to provide and what you're trying to build, or, what you're trying to speak about?
That's awesome. I love this. I love this. Kathleen, I would love to hear this. I would love to hear your answer for this. This is awesome.
Yes, it's a great question. And so, like, to reframe, we're talking about how do you make sure that like sort of growth and service are working together and in service to each other versus sacrificing one for the other. I was Chief Revenue Officer of RepairPal prior to the acquisition by Yelp. Now I have a different title. And so, very attentive to growth. That's my whole job, pretty much, growth and pricing and strategy. And so, it's important to think about the growth of the business, but I think that comes as a result of the things that you do, not in spite of the things that you do, relative to listening to your customers and staying attentive to what their needs are. If you are growing too fast, you'll find that the other sharp edge that you're about to hit is that you're not retaining those customers, or that you're not delivering on the promises, or that you have started delivering something that doesn't match to your market because you've stopped listening to them, to your point earlier, Kelly. And so you can't do that, and you shouldn't do that. And I'm probably a shade different than a lot of different revenue leaders that I've encountered, because I don't focus just on the numbers in terms of, how many partners we're signing, or what the referrals they're giving and all of that. Yes, I have to know all of that. That's part of my core job. But I believe when you do the right things and you really are attentive to making sure that you stay in conversation and you're listening and you're growing with your business instead of against it, that the money kind of falls out the back end of that. And sometimes that takes longer, or that takes patience that exec teams or boards or whoever you're accountable to don't always have. And so it's my job as a leader to really advocate for that. In fact, we had just done something earlier this year where we launched a feature. That feature didn't have broad business input, long story, but our customers were telling us no, right? And so, but then, everybody was like, but look, we can monetize it this way. And I'm like, that's bad monetization. What's going to happen is we're going to see an exodus of customers on the back end of this. And ultimately, we'll wish we had never done it. And so then I had to wage a campaign to basically remove it, even though it was producing sort of volume and results initially out of the gate. I knew that if we didn't really listen to our customers in this moment, we'd pay for it later. And luckily, I was successful with that. But it's always an interesting scenario when you see something moving and then everybody's like wanting to jump on that bandwagon. And as a revenue leader, you're going, actually, no, because it's bad business. But we all have to have the courage to do that, I think. And the only way to really be able to be that advocate for your customers is to stay in relationship and in conversation with them, which is something I'm super committed to.
I
Interesting.
just want to like jump back in on that because it's so relatable. We were just having this conversation with my CFO, and it's like that sunk cost, fallacy. And it's like sometimes leadership can spend 90% of its like energy and time like building features, and only 10% figuring out like how customers like will actually like experience them. And it's hard to know like when to just pull the plug, and to have someone like you to just say no, like it's time. No matter how much time and money you put into it, like sometimes you just got to know when to let go.
Yeah, and there's no such thing as spending too much time with your customers or too much time in
That, yeah,
conversation with your industry
yeah,
or whatever. It's what I'm always pushing my teams to do. I'm like, do we really understand our audience if it's a marketing campaign? Do we really understand customer if we're building product? Do we really understand our internal constituents if we're building a process? Right? And there's just no way to spend too much time doing that.
Agreed. Kaylee, is there a circumstance where for you where maybe a process for you, or how do you see this question answered for you and your career?
With PartsEdge, we've been around for I think it's been over 30 years now. And I feel like it's been not backwards in a bad way, but like we focused on the system that's already in place, and that's the DMS, and optimizing that. So we put in our technology to make that automated for parts managers, because the founders saw an opportunity of like, parts managers shouldn't be spending this much time on data and managing things. They should be focused on growing the business, the customer, training, all, everything, not figuring out where to put parts inside the data. So that's where I feel like we focused on that, got that nailed down. And now we are developing a reporting dashboard, which we have launched in the last 2 years. And that's been fairly new for me, like getting feedback from customers. And it's been a really good learning process, because we get to get the feedback and they get to log in and see something, rather than like we would be sending, PDFs of the health of their inventory. It's like they actually physically can go in and see it live. So like to your guys' point, where we've learned is to get that feedback, because we're constantly just improving and not saying this is what we think. We're asking them what they want, because when you look at the DMS and the reports for a parts manager's perspective, it's very archaic and it hasn't been updated since the 80s. So that's where we're really focusing on and getting their feedback, automating some detail that needs to happen rather than them having to dig, compile spreadsheets and cross things over. It's just a lot of layers. So yeah, it's product and all of that is a very, very new thing for me. And it's been a really good learning process, I think.
Awesome. Again, I hear the talking with customers more than anything. And Kelly, my assumption is knowing how much you are spending time in the field and how much time like John is spending in the field and how much time the whole team I see spending in the field, it's obvious that probably your answer is going to be talking with customers.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's not just like John and I or, like our account managers or things like that. It's even leadership, right? So I feel like a lot of times like the further that leadership gets away from the customer, like the riskier every decision becomes too. The further that leadership gets away from the customer, like the riskier every decision becomes too. So I mean, yeah, it's definitely important for us. I mean, we do a lot, and like me personally, like yeah, it's a lot of listening to the customer, but it's at every stage, and then making sure that like leadership, like it cascades down and back up, and it's continuous throughout that.
Interesting. And coming from a person who might be watching or listening from this and somebody with my kind of background who spent most of their time on the bench or in service, who doesn't have that same, 100, 500,000 store perspective as you three, looking at it from my perspective, I am potentially the customer of the product that the three of you create and provide. From my perspective, if someone isn't taking care of me and contacting me and understanding what I need and my needs on a day-to-day, monthly, quarterly, whatever the case may be, that's a lack of care. And Kelly, you and I had this very, very specific discussion. The level of care equals the level of culture. That applies both in the store as well as the products and services that are provided to the store. So, oh my goodness, itchy. So from a technician standpoint, if technicians and foremen and technicians and service managers and technicians and fixed ops directors aren't having the same level of conversation where any vendor partner is having with a dealer saying, what is it that you like about what we do? What is it you don't like about what we do? What would you change about what we do? What would you like to see that we do that maybe from left field, but you believe it's something that we should be providing? Those are the kinds of questions that I would hope that the three of you and any vendor partner would be asking of leaders in service, leaders in parts. Hey, this is awful. Do you provide a solution for this? Or do you know someone who does provide a solution to this? Or could you create a solution for this? I think one of the challenges, and I think all three of you being providers of solutions in software, so to speak, one of the biggest challenges I see from a product management standpoint, both personally and from an outward perspective, product people, developer people tend to like to build things because that is what they do. That is their job. That is their role. That is their purpose in life, especially developers specifically, or people who are very close to developers in the product side. They like to build things because that is literally their job. The challenge is when those same product people, as you said, Kelly, I think actually, as all three of you said, the farther leadership, the farther product gets away from the customer, the more likely you are going to make errors for your business, because now you're not taking in the customer into account in the things that you develop. So I appreciate that question, because quite honestly, as vendors, all of us, if we aren't talking to our customers, that's the biggest risk to our business, potentially, I think,
Yeah.
more than anything.
Yeah, like it's like every customer interaction like should teach you and be like a roadmap even for like the developers and feed back
Correct.
up, right? But it's keeping it like continuous from every level, making sure that like a shop foreman is translating down to like even the technicians and telling them like, hey, we have customers that are experiencing XYZ. Here's what you're doing that's adding to this. Here's how can we fix it? And just keeping like that conversation flowing. I think, it's helpful for anything, whether it's for fixed ops or like you're saying, like for building, SaaS products. Like it's something that you can kind of apply, regardless.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the first episode of season 2 of Earned Influence. I hope you enjoyed today's question by Kelli Verdi of Team MXS. And we were going to have another question for you coming up here in a very short period of time. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And as always, remember, negative pushes, positive pulls, and always clean your toys before you put them away.
Thank you for watching. Please share, subscribe, and tune in for the next episode.